I'm David Morrison, 47, a software consultant who thought he'd found his forever love. After 2 years together, Sarah stood at the altar in her flowing white dress, tears streaming down her face as she declared to our guests, "I don't care about money, I only care about love." The congregation smiled knowingly, charmed by her apparent sincerity. But 3 hours later, when she discovered what she believed were bankruptcy papers in my jacket pocket, everything changed. The woman who claimed money meant nothing became someone I didn't recognize. The tears that had moved our wedding guests turned cold and calculating. What Sarah didn't know was that those papers weren't what they seemed, and neither was I sometimes. The most devastating betrayals reveal the most liberating truths. If you've ever discovered someone's true nature at the worst possible moment, you'll understand what happened next. 2 years earlier, I met Sarah at a community fundraiser for the local food bank. She was volunteering at the registration table, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light as she smiled warmly at each donor. What struck me wasn't just her beauty, it was how she seemed genuinely moved by the cause. Tears in her eyes as she spoke about families struggling to put food on the table. "I know what it's like to go without," she told me during a quiet moment, her voice soft with what I believed was vulnerability. "Money has never been important to me. People matter more than possessions." Those words would echo in my mind for months. Here was a woman who understood life's deeper values, someone who wouldn't be swayed by material wealth. After my first marriage ended because of financial disagreements and my ex-wife's constant demands for a more luxurious lifestyle, Sarah seemed like a breath of fresh air. Our first date was at a small diner, she suggested, insisting she preferred authentic places with character over expensive restaurants. She ordered the cheapest item on the menu and made a point of mentioning how much she enjoyed simple pleasures. When I offered to take her somewhere nicer, she shook her head with what appeared to be genuine conviction. "This is perfect," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "I'd rather spend money on experiences that help others than on fancy meals." I was charmed. Here was someone who shared my values about giving back, who understood that true happiness couldn't be bought. Or so I thought. Looking back now, I can see the subtle signs I missed. The way her eyes lingered on expensive cars and parking lots. How she always seemed to know the exact price of designer items she claimed to disdain. The careful way she dressed, down for our dates, yet somehow always looked perfectly put together. The engagement ring should have been my first real test. I chose something modest, but beautiful 1-carat diamond in a simple setting. When I proposed on the beach at sunset, Sarah's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. She cried, said yes, and told me it was the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen. But hidden in my home office files was the receipt for the ring. I'd actually wanted to give her a 3-carat masterpiece that cost more than most people's cars. I'd changed my mind at the last minute, wanting to honor what I believed were her values about simplicity and authenticity. 3 months into our engagement, I overheard her on the phone with her sister. "It's smaller than I expected," she said, her voice carrying a disappointment she never showed me. "But David's practical. I'm sure he's saving money for more important things." That conversation planted the first seed of doubt, not about her love for me, but about whether I truly knew who she was beneath the carefully crafted image she presented to the world. The morning of our wedding, I woke at 5:30 a.m. with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with nerves. For weeks, I'd been wrestling with a decision that felt both necessary and cruel. The fake bankruptcy documents were already printed and folded in my jacket pocket, waiting for the right moment. I'd spent considerable time crafting those papers with my attorney's help, not for any illegal purpose, but as what he called a relationship stress test. The documents looked authentic enough to fool a casual observer, complete with official letterhead and legal jargon about debt restructuring and asset liquidation. They painted a picture of a man who had lost everything, whose consulting business had failed, catastrophic ally. As I dressed in my tuxedo, I caught my reflection in the mirror. At 47, I had earned every gray hair and laugh line. My software consulting firm employed 12 people and had been profitable for over a decade. My investment portfolio was substantial, my home was paid off, and I had enough saved to retire comfortably before 60. Yet here I was, about to marry a woman whose true feelings about money I still questioned. Sarah had insisted on handling most of the wedding planning herself, claiming she wanted to keep costs reasonable. "We don't need to spend a fortune to have a beautiful day," she'd said repeatedly. But I noticed how her definition of reasonable seemed to expand when she thought the expense wouldn't be visible to me. The floor bill was 3 times the original quote. The photographer's basic package had somehow grown to include additional services Sarah deemed essential. When I questioned these increases, she had explanations ready. The flowers were seasonal. The photographer had offered upgrades she couldn't refuse. More telling was her behavior with vendors who assumed I would be paying. With the caterer, she was warm and accommodating about menu changes. With the musicians, she was gracious about their suggestions for additional equipment. But when she thought payment was coming from her own pocket, her demeanor shifted entirely. Watched her argue with the cake decorator about a $50 charge for extra frosting roses, her voice sharp with indignation. "That's highway robbery," she snapped. I could make those roses myself for pennies. The morning of the wedding, I made my final preparations. I placed a fake bank statement showing massive debts on my dresser, partially hidden under some papers, but visible enough for curious eyes. I moved the bankruptcy documents to my jacket pocket, the weight of them a constant reminder of what I was about to do. My best man, Michael, arrived at 8 a.m. to help me get ready. He knew about my plan and had tried to talk me out of it. "This is your wedding day, David," he said, adjusting my tie. "Are you sure this is the right time for this kind of test? If not now, when?" I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'd rather know today than discover it during a real financial crisis 5 years from now," he sighed, understanding my logic even if he disagreed with my methods. "Just remember, there might be no coming back from this." I nodded, knowing he was right. Today would reveal Sarah's true character, and mine as well. The ceremony was held at St. Mary's Chapel, a modest stone church where Sarah had insisted we marry despite my offer to pay for a larger venue. "It's not about the size of the church," she had said, "but the size of the love in our hearts." Standing at the altar, I watched Sarah walk down the aisle in her flowing white gown. She looked radiant, her smile bright, and her eyes sparkling with what appeared to be pure joy. Our guests, a mix of family, friends, and colleagues, watched with warm smiles as she approached. The ceremony proceeded traditionally until we reached the personal vows. Sarah had insisted on writing. When her turn came, she took my hands and looked directly into my eyes, her voice trembling with emotion. "David," she began, her words carrying clearly through the small chapel, "I stand before you today, not as someone who needs your wealth or your possessions, but as someone who has found her true treasure in your heart." A murmur of approval rippled through the congregation. I felt the weight of the fake bankruptcy papers in my jacket pocket, a constant reminder of what was coming. "I know we live in a world obsessed with material things," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "But I want everyone here to know that I don't care about money. I don't care about fancy cars or expensive jewelry or big houses. All I care about is the man standing before me, the love we share, and the life we're going to build together." The tears came then, streaming down her cheeks as she spoke. Several guests reached for tissues, moved by her apparent sincerity. My own mother dabbed at her eyes, clearly touched by Sarah's words. "I promise to love you in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. "But most importantly, I promise to love you for who you are, not for what you have. Because what you have given me, your heart, your trust, your love, is worth more than all the money in the world." The congregation was silent, hanging on every word. When Sarah finished, spontaneous applause broke out, something I'd never seen at a wedding ceremony before. Even the minister seemed moved, his usually formal demeanor softened by Sarah's emotional display. When my turn came, I delivered the vows I had written weeks earlier, speaking of partnership, growth, and mutual respect. But my words felt hollow compared to Sarah's passionate declaration. I found myself wondering if she truly meant what she'd said, or if this was simply another performance. The ring exchange proceeded smoothly, Sarah's hands trembling slightly as I slipped the wedding band onto her finger. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, she kissed me with what seemed like genuine passion and relief. As we walked back down the aisle together, rice and flower petals raining down on us, I caught glimpses of our guests' faces. They were beaming, clearly moved by what they had witnessed. Sarah squeezed my hand tightly, her smile brilliant and her eyes still bright with unshed tears. "I love you, Mrs. Morrison," I whispered in her ear. "I love you too," she replied, her voice soft and sweet. "No matter what happens, remember that." Those words would haunt me in the hours to come, making me wonder if she somehow knew what was in my pocket, waiting to change everything. The reception was held at the Willowbrook Country Club, a venue Sarah had initially resisted until I explained it was actually less expensive than the hotel ballroom she had preferred. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was willing to accept luxury when it came at a lower price. As we entered the reception hall, I watched Sarah's eyes sweep the room, taking in the elegant decorations and the carefully arranged seating. She had spent hours on the seating chart, and I now understood why. The wealthy members of both our families and my most successful colleagues were seated prominently near the head table, while more modest friends and distant relatives were relegated to tables near the back. "You look beautiful, dear," said Mrs. Henderson, the wife of one of my biggest clients, as she approached Sarah during the cocktail hour. "That dress is absolutely stunning." Sarah's demeanor immediately brightened. "Thank you so much," she replied, her voice taking on a slightly different tone, more refined, more careful. "David insisted I get something special for our big day." I noticed how she credited me with the expense, distancing herself from any appearance of materialism while still basking in the compliment. It was a subtle but telling detail. Later, I watched her interact with my cousin Jerry, a mechanic who had driven for hours to attend our wedding. When he complimented her on the flowers, Sarah's response was noticeably cooler. "Oh, those," she said dismissively. I tried to keep things simple. We didn't want to go overboard. The contrast was stark. With Mrs. Henderson, she had been warm and engaging. With Jerry, she was polite but distant. as if his opinion carried less weight because of his occupation. During the dinner service, Sarah made a point of visiting every table, playing the gracious hostess, but I noticed patterns in her behavior. At tables with successful business owners, doctors, and lawyers, she lingered longer, laughing more genuinely at their jokes and asking follow-up questions about their lives and work. At tables with teachers, service workers, and retirees on fixed incomes, her visits were brief and perfunctory. She smiled and thanked them for coming, but there was no real warmth. No genuine interest in their stories. My mother, ever perceptive, pulled me aside during a quiet moment. "Sarah seems lovely," she said carefully, "but I noticed she spent quite a bit of time with the Hendersons and barely spoke to your Aunt Margaret." Aunt Margaret was a retired librarian who had helped raise me after my father died. Her absence from Sarah's attention hadn't gone unnoticed. "She's just nervous," I replied, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "It's overwhelming meeting so many people at once." My mother nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She had always been a good judge of character, and her instincts about Sarah were clearly similar to mine. As the evening progressed, I felt the weight of the papers in my pocket growing heavier. Soon, Sarah would discover them, and we would both learn who she really was. The moment came 3 hours into the reception, right after we had finished our first dance. Sarah had excused herself to the bridal suite to touch up her makeup, and I had deliberately left my jacket hanging on the back of my chair when someone asked me to help with a minor catering issue. When I returned to the head table 15 minutes later, Sarah was nowhere to be seen. My jacket was still there, but something felt different. The papers in my pocket had been shifted slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but I had been expecting this moment for weeks. I found Sarah in the bridal suite, sitting on the small velvet sofa with the fake bankruptcy documents spread across her lap. Her wedding makeup was smudged, and her hands were shaking as she read through the carefully crafted legal language that painted a picture of financial ruin. "What is this, David?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gone was the radiant bride from the ceremony. In her place sat a woman whose mask was beginning to slip. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, studying her face. "You found some papers in my jacket." "These aren't just papers," she said, her voice rising. "These are bankruptcy documents. This says you owe over $2 million. This says your business is being liquidated. This says—" She stopped, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "What does it say, Sarah?" She looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw her true face. The carefully maintained composure was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. "It says we have nothing," she whispered. "It says you've been lying to me about everything. Your house, your business, your savings, none of it's real." I remained silent, watching as she processed what she believed she had discovered. The transformation was remarkable and heartbreaking. The woman who had stood at the altar declaring that money meant nothing to her was crumbling before my eyes. "How long have you known?" she demanded, standing up and scattering the papers to the floor. "How long have you been planning to dump this on me?" "I haven't been planning anything, Sarah. I've been hoping I was wrong about you." She stared at me, confusion mixing with her panic. "Wrong about what?" "Wrong about who you really are, underneath all the noble speeches about not caring about money." Her face flushed red. "That's not fair. Of course I care about our financial security. Any rational person would be upset to discover their spouse has been hiding massive debts. Is that what this is about? Our financial security? Yes?" she shouted, then immediately tried to backtrack. No. This isn't about the money, David. It's about the lies. It's about trust." But her eyes told a different story. They weren't filled with the hurt of betrayal or the pain of broken trust. They were filled with the cold calculation of someone trying to figure out how to minimize her losses. "Sarah, do you remember what you said at the altar? About not caring about money?" "Of course I remember, and I meant it. But this is different. This is exactly what you said didn't matter to you." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words that would make her reaction seem reasonable. But we both knew the truth now. The woman who had moved our wedding guests to tears with her passionate declaration of love over material possessions was standing in a bridal suite, panicking about money she had claimed not to care about. The silence stretched between us until, finally, she spoke in a voice I had never heard before, calculating, and completely devoid of the warmth I thought I had fallen in love with. "What exactly are you saying, David?" Sarah's question hung in the air between us, but her tone had already given me my answer. The loving woman who had promised to stand by me through poverty and wealth was gone, replaced by someone I was only now beginning to recognize. "I'm saying that 3 hours ago, you told a room full of people that money didn't matter to you," I replied calmly. "And now you're falling apart because you think I don't have any." Her laugh was bitter and sharp. "You think this is about greed? You think I'm some kind of gold digger? I think you're showing me exactly who you are when you believe the money is gone." She began pacing the small room, her wedding dress rustling with each agitated step. "This is unbelievable. I find out my husband has been lying about his financial situation, and somehow I'm the villain." "What lies? Sarah, what specifically did I lie about?" She stopped pacing and turned to face me. You let me believe you were successful. You let me believe we had a future together. And now that you think the success is gone, we don't have a future. That's not what I said. Then what are you saying? Her composure cracked further. I'm saying that I had a right to know. I'm saying that I made decisions based on information that wasn't true. What decisions? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again, realizing she was about to reveal more than she intended. Normal life decisions, she said finally. Where to live, what kind of lifestyle we could have, whether to have children, whether to marry me at all. She stared at me, her silence more revealing than any words could have been. I walked over to where the papers had fallen and picked them up, folding them carefully. You know what's interesting about these documents, Sarah? They're dated 6 months ago. If they were real, I would have been legally required to disclose this debt before we got married. Her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you didn't even think to question why I would hide something this significant from you. You just assumed I was the kind of man who would trick you into marriage under false pretenses. People do that all the time, she said defensively. Do they? And you believed I was that kind of person? She had no answer for that, because we both knew the truth. She had been so focused on the financial implications that she hadn't stopped to consider whether the scenario even made sense. Let me ask you something else, I continued. If these papers were real, what would you do? I don't know. I'd need time to think. Would you stay married to me? She hesitated just a moment too long. Of course I would. I love you. But you'd need time to think about it. Anyone would need time to process something like this. Really? Because I seem to remember you promising to love me in poverty and in wealth? That was less than 4 hours ago. Her face flushed again. Stop twisting my words. This isn't about poverty, it's about dishonesty. No, Sarah, this is about exactly what you said it wasn't about. This is about money, and your panic at the thought of not having it. She tried one more time to regain control of the narrative. I have a right to be concerned about our financial stability. That doesn't make me materialistic. You're right. Being concerned about financial stability doesn't make you materialistic. But your first instinct wasn't to ask how we could work through this together. It wasn't to offer support or comfort. It was to panic about what this meant. For you, I could see her searching for a response that would restore her moral high ground. But we had moved beyond the point where words could paper over what had been revealed. I think, I said quietly, we both learned something important about each other today. She looked at me with something approaching hatred. What is that supposed to mean? It means I know who you really are now, Sarah, and you know who I really am too. As Sarah stared at me with barely concealed anger, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. She didn't know my full story, and perhaps that was part of the problem. I grew up in a modest 2-bedroom apartment with my mother after my father died when I was 12. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and I learned early that money might not buy happiness, but the lack of it could certainly cause misery. I watched my mother work 2 jobs to keep us afloat, saw her cry over bills she couldn't pay, and promised myself I would never be that vulnerable again. My first marriage, to Rebecca, had taught me painful lessons about mixing love and money. Rebecca was beautiful, charming, and had expensive tastes that grew more elaborate as my software consulting business began to succeed. What started as occasional requests for designer clothes escalated to demands for luxury vacations, a bigger house, and a lifestyle that felt more like keeping up appearances than building a life together. You can afford it, became Rebecca's standard response whenever I questioned an expense. She wasn't wrong technically. I could afford most of what she wanted, but her spending wasn't about need or even desire. It was about status and her need to project success to others. The breaking point came when Rebecca emptied our savings account to buy a new BMW without consulting me. When I discovered the purchase, she was defensive and dismissive. It's our money, she said, and I needed a reliable car. Our money that you spent without discussing it with me, I replied. And your old car was 2 years old and perfectly reliable. I shouldn't have to justify every purchase to you like I'm a child asking for an allowance. That argument revealed the fundamental disconnect between us. Rebecca saw our marriage as entitling her to my earnings without requiring her input into financial decisions. She wanted the benefits of my success without the partnership that success demanded. Our divorce was expensive and bitter. Rebecca's attorney argued that she had become accustomed to a certain lifestyle and deserved continued support. The settlement cost me nearly half of everything I had built, but it also taught me the value of truly understanding someone's relationship with money before making a permanent commitment. After the divorce, I threw myself into my business. Morrison Consulting grew from a one-man operation to a firm with 12 employees and clients across 3 states. I developed specialized software solutions for mid-sized companies, work that was both intellectually satisfying and financially rewarding. More importantly, I learned to be selective about the people I allowed into my life. I dated occasionally, but always with a healthy skepticism about women who seemed too interested in my lifestyle or too casual about expensive restaurants and gifts. When I met Sarah at the food bank fundraiser, I thought I had found someone different. Her apparent disdain for materialism and her focus on helping others felt like the antidote to Rebecca's relentless consumption. For 2 years, I convinced myself that Sarah represented everything Rebecca wasn't. But standing in this bridal suite, watching Sarah's mask slip away, I realized I had made a crucial error. I had been so focused on finding someone who was different from Rebecca that I had ignored the signs that Sarah might be exactly the same, just better at hiding it. The fake bankruptcy papers had been my attempt to avoid repeating the mistake of my first marriage. If Sarah truly loved me for who I was rather than what I had, then financial ruin shouldn't change her feelings. If her love was conditional on my success, better to learn that now than during an actual crisis years down the road. Looking at her now, I felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. Disappointment that the woman I thought I loved didn't really exist, but relief that I had discovered the truth before it was too late to protect myself. Sarah was still staring at me, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of what was happening. I decided it was time to give her the truth she claimed to want. Those papers aren't real? Sarah, her expression shifted from anger to confusion. What do you mean they aren't real? I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen toward her. The account balance showed a number that made her eyes widen. More money than she had probably expected to see. I mean, they're fake. Carefully crafted by my attorney, but completely fictional. She grabbed the phone from my hands, scrolling through the account details. Multiple business accounts, investment portfolios, and savings accounts painted a picture of substantial wealth that was very much real. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would you do this? Because I needed to know who you really are when you think the money is gone. She looked up from the phone, her face pale. This was a test. Yes, on our wedding day. You decided to test me on our wedding day. I decided to test you before I made the biggest financial mistake of my life. The words hit her like a physical blow. She sank back onto the sofa, still holding my phone, staring at the proof of my deception. You let me believe you were bankrupt. You watched me panic and fall apart, and this was all just some sick experiment. I watched you reveal your true priorities. I corrected, and now we both know what they are. My true priorities. Her voice was rising again. My priority is not being lied to by my husband. Your priority is money. Sarah, we both know that. Now. She stood up abruptly, throwing my phone back at me. You're insane. You're absolutely insane if you think this proves anything, except that you're a manipulative liar. What would you have done if the papers were real? The question stopped. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. You would have left me, I said quietly. Maybe not immediately, but you would have found a way out of this marriage. You would have convinced yourself that I had deceived you, that you couldn't trust me, that you deserved better. That's not true, isn't it? Then tell me what you would have done. If I really had lost everything, if we really were starting our marriage with massive debt and no prospects, what would your next step have been? She struggled to find an answer that wouldn't condemn her. We would have figured it out together, would we? Because your first reaction wasn't to ask how we could solve the problem together. It was to panic about what this meant for your security. Any rational person would be concerned about financial security. You're right, but any person who truly didn't care about money would have been more concerned about their spouse's well-being. You never once asked if I was okay, if I needed support, if I was struggling with the stress of financial failure. Your first thought was about how this affected you. She had no response to that because we both knew it was true. The papers were fake, Sarah, but your reaction was real. That's who you are when you think the comfortable life is gone. That's who you are when you believe the money isn't there to buffer you from life's uncertainties. So what now? She asked, her voice flat and defeated. You've proven I'm a terrible person. You've humiliated me on our wedding day. What's your next move in this elaborate game? This isn't a game. This is me learning that I can't trust you with the truth about who I am or what I have. And I'm learning that I can't trust you at all. We stared at each other across the small room. Two people who had promised to love each other forever just hours earlier, now seeing each other clearly. For the first time, the silence in the bridal suite stretched on until Sarah's survival instincts seemed to kick in. I watched her face transform as she realized the full implications of what had just happened. The anger and indignation faded, replaced by something more calculating. David, she said, her voice suddenly softer, more like the woman I thought I had fallen in love with. I think we're both overreacting here. I said nothing, curious to see what approach she would take. You're right that I panicked when I found those papers. I admit that, but you have to understand. Finding out your husband has been hiding bankruptcy documents on your wedding day would upset anyone. She moved closer to me, reaching for my hands. I let her take them but didn't respond to her touch. I know I didn't react the way you wanted me to, she continued, her eyes filling with tears. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. It doesn't mean money is more important to me than our relationship, doesn't it? No, it doesn't. The tears were flowing freely now, but something about them felt different from the genuine emotion I had seen during the ceremony. These tears felt practiced, strategic. I was scared, David. I was scared about our future, about how we would manage, about what people would think. But underneath all that fear was love. It was always love. I studied her face, noting how she had positioned herself in the light from the window so the tears would catch the sunlight. Even in crisis, Sarah was aware of her presentation. Think about our relationship, she pressed on. Think about all the times I chose the less expensive restaurant, the modest gifts, the simple pleasures. Doesn't that prove that money isn't what matters to me? Or does it prove that you are very good at playing a role? She flinched as if I had slapped her. That's cruel. Is it because I'm starting to remember things differently now? Like how you always seem to know the exact price of the designer items you claimed to disdain. Or how you spent more time talking to wealthy guests at parties than to anyone else. You're rewriting history to fit your narrative. Am I? Let me ask you something, Sarah. In your purse right now, do you have the letters you wrote me during our engagement? She looked confused. What letters? The love letters. The ones where you talked about our future together, about building a simple life based on love rather than material success. Her hesitation told me everything I needed to know. There were letters, but they weren't what she had led me to believe they were. I don't know what you're getting at. I think you do, because I think those letters reveal a lot more about your actual expectations for our marriage than the speeches you gave about not caring about money. She pulled her hands away from mine, her mask slipping again. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? This whole elaborate setup to make me look bad? I've been hoping for months that I was wrong about you, but you weren't wrong, were you? In your mind I was always going to fail this test because you had already decided I was guilty. No, Sarah, I hoped you would surprise me. I hoped you would react to those papers with concern for my well-being, rather than panic about your security. I hoped you would offer to support me through a crisis, rather than immediately calculating your exit strategy. I wasn't calculating. Exit strategy? Then what were you doing when you asked me what this meant for our future? She had no answer for that because we both knew what she had been doing. She had been trying to figure out whether it was worth staying married to a man she believed had nothing left to offer her. The tears stopped abruptly, replaced by cold anger. You know what, David? Maybe you're right. Maybe I am exactly what you think I am, but at least I'm not a manipulative liar who tricks people on their wedding day. You're right. You're not a manipulative liar. You're much worse than that. What's that supposed to mean? It means Rebecca, my ex-wife, was at least honest about what she wanted. She never pretended to be something she wasn't. You, on the other hand, have spent 2 years lying about your values, your priorities, and your character. At least Rebecca's greed was authentic. The comparison to my ex-wife seemed to hit harder than anything else I had said. Sarah's face went white, then red, then white again. How dare you compare me to her? How can I not? You're both women who saw me as a provider first and a person second. The only difference is that she was honest about it. The comparison to Rebecca seemed to break something fundamental in Sarah. She stared at me with pure hatred before storming toward the door of the bridal suite. Where are you going? I asked. Back to our guests. You know, the people who came here to celebrate our marriage, instead of conducting psychological experiments. She paused with her hand on the doorknob. And David, when people ask why the bride looks upset, I'm going to tell them the truth about what kind of man I married. I let her go, knowing that whatever happened next was inevitable. The facade was over, and there was no putting it back together. I waited 5 minutes before returning to the reception myself, using the time to compose myself and prepare for what was coming. When I emerged from the bridal suite, I could immediately sense that something had changed in the atmosphere of the reception. Sarah was at our head table, surrounded by her sister and mother, speaking in urgent whispers. Her mascara was smudged despite her attempts to repair it, and her body language screamed distress. Several guests were looking in their direction with concern. My mother approached me almost immediately. David, what's wrong? Sarah came back, looking like she'd seen a ghost. And she won't tell anyone what happened. We had a disagreement, I said simply. A disagreement? On your wedding day? About what? Before I could answer, Sarah's voice cut across the reception hall. She had stood up and was addressing the tables nearest to ours, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. I want everyone to know, she announced, that my husband has been lying to me about his financial situation. I just discovered that he's been hiding massive debts and bankruptcy proceedings from me. A collective gasp went up from the guests. I saw my business partner, Tom, look at me with shock and concern. Mrs. Henderson's face showed a mixture of sympathy and embarrassment at being witness to such a public display. Sarah, I said calmly, walking toward our table. I think you're confused about what you discovered. Confused. She laughed bitterly. I found bankruptcy papers in your jacket pocket, David, papers showing that you owe millions of dollars and that your business is being liquidated. The murmur of concerned voices grew louder. I could see people pulling out their phones, some probably to check the news for reports about my business, others likely preparing to share this drama on social media. Those papers, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room, are fake. The reception hall fell completely silent. Sarah's face went white. What? She whispered. They're fake documents that I had prepared as a test to see how you would react if you believed I had lost everything. The silence stretched on as our guests processed what they had just heard. Then the whispers began, not concerned, murmurs this time, but the harsh sound of judgment being passed. Sarah's mother stood up abruptly. Are you saying you deliberately deceived my daughter on her wedding day? I'm saying I wanted to know whether she loved me or my money. And now you know, Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage and humiliation. Congratulations, David. You've proven that I'm human enough to be concerned about our financial future. No, I replied. I've proven that your love is conditional. On my success, the judgment in the room was swift and divided. I could see some guests, particularly the older ones who had lived through real financial hardships, nodding in understanding. Others, particularly Sarah's friends and family, looked at me with disgust. My Aunt Margaret approached cautiously. David, honey, maybe this isn't the time or place for this conversation. She was right, but it was too late for discretion. The truth was out, and there was no controlling how it spread or how people interpreted it. The reception had transformed from a celebration into a spectacle. Guests were no longer pretending to eat or make small talk. Attention was focused on the drama unfolding at the head table. I knew I had to take control of the situation before it spiraled further out of hand. Sarah, I said, my voice calm but firm, I think we should continue this conversation privately. No. Her response was immediate and sharp. You wanted to test me in front of all these people. Fine, let's finish this in front of all these people. Her sister Jennifer stood up and put a protective arm around Sarah. David, I think you've done enough damage for one day. Have I, or have I simply revealed the truth? The truth. Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. The truth is that you're a cruel, manipulative man who destroyed his own wedding to prove some sick point about money. The truth, I replied, is that 3 hours ago you stood in front of these same people and declared that money meant nothing to you, and 30 minutes ago you fell apart when you thought it was gone. I fell apart because I thought my husband had been lying to me. No, Sarah, you fell apart because you thought your comfortable life was gone. The accusation hung in the air between us. I could see our guests following every word, their faces showing a mixture of fascination and horror at witnessing such an intimate confrontation. Sarah's father, a quiet man who had barely spoken during the entire engagement, suddenly stepped forward. David, I think you owe my daughter an apology. For what? For discovering her true character before it was too late? For humiliating her on what should have been the happiest day of her life? I looked at him, a man who had worked 2 jobs his entire life to provide for his family, who understood the value of money because he had never had enough of it. Mr. Patterson, with respect, I think your daughter humiliated herself. Sarah's mother gasped. How dare you speak to us that way? I'm speaking honestly, I replied. Something that seems to be in short supply in this family. What is that supposed to mean? Sarah demanded. It means you've all been pretending that money doesn't matter to you while carefully positioning yourselves to benefit from mine. It means this whole relationship has been built on a foundation of lies. That's not true, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Tell me, Sarah, when was the last time you paid for dinner when we went out? When was the last time you offered to contribute to any of our shared expenses? When was the last time you suggested we do something that cost you money instead of me? She had no answer because we both knew she never had. For 2 years, she had allowed me to pay for everything while maintaining the fiction that money didn't matter to her. You want to know what kind of man you married? I continued. You married a man who learned to protect himself from people who see him as a source of financial security instead of a human being worthy of genuine love. And you want to know what kind of woman you married? Sarah shot back. You married someone who deserved honesty and trust, not manipulation and psychological games. I gave you 2 years of honesty, Sarah. I was honest about my feelings, my hopes for our future, my desire to build something real with you. The only thing I wasn't honest about was testing whether your love was conditional. Of course it's conditional, she exploded. All love is conditional. I'm not going to stay married to someone who lies to me and humiliates me. The admission hung in the air like a confession. She had just proven my point more effectively than any test could have. Thank you, I said quietly, for finally being honest about what? About the fact that your love comes with conditions? About the fact that you would leave me if the circumstances weren't to your liking? About the fact that for better or for worse only applies when worse doesn't actually affect your lifestyle? She stared at me, realizing what she had just revealed about herself. Around us, our guests watched in stunned silence as a marriage dissolved in real time. The confrontation had reached its natural conclusion, but the practical implications were just beginning. Sarah stood in her wedding dress, surrounded by family and friends, facing the reality that her marriage was over before it had truly begun. Fine, she said, her voice cold and determined. If this is how you want to play it, David, then let's talk about what happens next. I pulled my attorney's business card from my wallet, not the fake one I had shown her earlier, but the real card of the lawyer who had helped me prepare for this possibility. I had Robert Sullivan draw up some papers weeks ago, I said, handing her the card. He specializes in family law. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she read the name. You've been planning this for weeks. I've been preparing for various outcomes, including this one. Her sister Jennifer snatched the card from Sarah's hand. This is unbelievable. You planned your own divorce before you even got married? I planned for the possibility that I might need to protect myself, I corrected. Unfortunately, I was right to do so. Sarah's composure was hanging by a thread. Protect yourself from what? From me. From someone who would see my assets as community property, while considering their own financial contribution irrelevant. We've been married for 4 hours, David. There is no community property. Exactly, which makes this much cleaner than it could have been. The legal reality was settling in for everyone present. In our state, marriages could be annulled under certain circumstances, including fraud or misrepresentation. Sarah's public admission that she would leave me for dishonesty could actually work in my favor. So what are you saying? Sarah asked. That you want an annulment? I'm saying that we both learned something today about the nature of our relationship, and neither of us should have to live with the consequences of a marriage built on false premises. Her father stepped forward again. What false premises? You lied to her, not the other way around. I tested her, Mr. Patterson. There's a difference, is there? Because from where I'm standing, you deceived my daughter on her wedding day too. Make some kind of point about money. The point, I replied, was to discover whether she loved me or the lifestyle I could provide. Now we all know the answer. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her calculating. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on a harder edge. If you want out of this marriage, David, it's going to cost you. Cost me what? Whatever a good attorney thinks I'm entitled to for the humiliation and emotional distress you've caused me today. I had been expecting this. Sarah, we've been married for 4 hours. You're not entitled to anything except your personal belongings. We'll see about that. Yes, we will. And when we do, we'll also discuss your misrepresentation of your financial values throughout our relationship. We'll discuss how you allowed me to pay for everything while claiming money didn't matter to you. We'll discuss fraud and misrepresentation on your part. Her face went pale. She hadn't considered that her own behavior might have legal implications. You can't prove I misrepresented anything, can't I? We have 2 years of documented expenses where you consistently allowed me to pay while claiming to value simplicity and non-materialism. We have witnesses to your behavior with wealthy versus modest guests tonight. We have your own words about not caring about money, followed immediately by your panic when you thought it was gone. My attorney had prepared me well for this conversation. The fake bankruptcy papers had been his idea, actually a way to document Sarah's true priorities in a way that would be difficult to dispute later. This is insane, Sarah whispered. This whole thing is insane. It's practical, I replied, and it's necessary. For who? For both of us. Because now we both know exactly who we married. The reception was effectively over. Guests were gathering their belongings and leaving in small groups, some stopping to offer awkward condolences, others simply slipping away to avoid further drama. The carefully planned celebration had become a cautionary tale that people would discuss for years. Sarah disappeared into the bridal suite with her mother and sister, leaving me to handle the practical matters of ending what had barely begun. The caterers needed to be paid, the band needed direction about whether to continue playing, and someone had to deal with the wedding gifts that were stacked on a table near the entrance. My best man, Michael, approached with a grim expression. David, I have to ask, are you okay with how this played out? I'm relieved, I said honestly. Disappointed, but relieved. Relieved that your marriage is over. Relieved that I learned the truth before it was too late to protect myself. He shook his head. I still think there might have been a better way to handle this. Maybe, but this way was definitive. The venue manager approached nervously. Mr. Morrison, I hate to interrupt, but we need to know how you'd like to handle the remainder of the evening. Some guests are asking about the dancing portion of the reception. I looked around the nearly empty hall. I think we can call it an evening. Please make sure the staff gets their full tip regardless. Of course, sir. And the flowers and decorations. Donate them to a nursing home or hospital. Someone should get some joy out of them. As the venue staff began the process of breaking down the reception, Sarah emerged from the bridal suite. She had changed out of her wedding dress into a simple, black dress she must have brought for the honeymoon. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I'm leaving, she announced. My parents are driving me home. That's probably for the best. She hesitated, as if she wanted to say something more, then shook her head. My attorney will be in touch with yours. I'm sure he will, David. Her voice was softer now, almost vulnerable. Did you ever really love me? The question caught me off guard. For a moment, the angry, calculating woman was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely hurt and confused. I loved who I thought you were, I answered honestly. I'm not sure that person ever existed. She nodded slowly, accepting the truth of that statement. I guess that makes 2 of us. As she walked away, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. The woman I had fallen in love with at the food bank fundraiser had been a carefully constructed persona, designed to appeal to someone like me. The real Sarah was the woman who panicked about money while claiming it didn't matter, who treated people differently based on their wealth, who saw marriage as a financial arrangement disguised as love. My mother was the last family member to approach me before leaving. I'm sorry it ended this way, sweetheart, she said, embracing me. I'm not, I replied. Better to know now than after children and years of shared assets. Still, it must hurt. It does. But not as much as living a lie would have. She squeezed my hand. You did what you thought was necessary. I can't say I agree with your methods, but I understand your reasons. That's all I can ask for. After everyone left, I sat alone in the empty reception hall. surrounded by the remnants of what was supposed to be the beginning of my new life. Instead, it felt like the end of an illusion I had been living for 2 years. The wedding gifts would need to be returned. The honeymoon would need to be canceled. The legal proceedings would begin. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. 3 days later, I sat in my home office staring at a journal entry I had started writing the morning after the wedding. The words came slowly, but they felt necessary, a way to process what had happened and what it meant for my future. Today I learned that testing someone's love is both cruel and necessary, I wrote. The cruelty lies in the deception required to strip away pretense. The necessity lies in the cost of being wrong about someone's true character. The phone had been ringing constantly since the wedding. Some calls were from concerned friends and family. Others were from curious acquaintances who had heard various versions of the story. A few were from reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the drama. Apparently, a software consultant testing his bride with fake bankruptcy papers was newsworthy in our small business community. I had ignored most of the calls, but I did speak with my attorney, Robert Sullivan, who confirmed what I already knew. The marriage could be annulled relatively easily. Sarah's attorney had made initial contact, but their demands were unrealistic, given the brief duration of the marriage and the circumstances surrounding its end. More interesting was the reaction from my business community. 3 potential clients had called to express support for my practical approach to relationships. Apparently, my willingness to protect my assets before marriage had impressed rather than horrified some people. The hardest part, I continued, writing, is accepting that I fell in love with a fiction. Sarah wasn't inherently evil or even unusually materialistic. She was simply someone who had learned to package herself as what she thought successful men wanted, a woman who claimed to value love over money while carefully positioning herself to benefit from both. I thought about our 2 years together, reimagining conversations and situations with new understanding. The way she had deferred to my financial decisions while never offering to contribute. The way she had researched my business and asked carefully calculated questions about my success. The way she had managed to learn about my assets and investments while maintaining her pose as someone who didn't care about such things. Sarah taught me that authenticity is rare and valuable, I wrote. She also taught me that my instincts about people are better than my desire to believe the best about them. The doorbell interrupted my writing. Through the window, I could see Tom, my business partner, standing on the front porch with a bottle of what looked like expensive whiskey. I figured you might need some company, he said when I opened the door, and alcohol. Definitely alcohol. We sat in my living room, the same room where Sarah and I had planned our future together, where we had discussed children and retirement and growing old together. Now those conversations felt like scenes from someone else's life. I have to ask, Tom said after we had each had a drink. Do you regret it? The test, I mean. I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret doing it. But you destroyed your own wedding to make a point. I revealed the truth about my relationship. The destruction was a byproduct, not the goal. He nodded slowly. And now I know that I can trust my judgment about people. Now I know that my assets are protected. Now I know that the next woman I fall in love with will have to prove her authenticity over time rather than through crisis. You think there will be a next woman? Eventually, but she'll have to be someone who demonstrates her values through her actions over years, not through her words during courtship. Tom raised his glass. To learning hard truths? To learning them before it's too late, I replied. As we drank, I felt something I hadn't expected: peace. The sadness was still there, along with disappointment about the future I had planned with Sarah. But underneath those emotions was a solid foundation of self-respect and clarity about what I wanted in a partner. I had learned that love without authenticity is just elaborate self-deception, and that protecting yourself isn't selfish if it prevents greater damage down the road. 2 weeks after the wedding, I found myself throwing myself into work with a focus I hadn't felt in months. The new business proposal on my desk represented a potential expansion into cybersecurity consulting, something I had been considering for years but had postponed due to wedding planning and the distractions of my relationship with Sarah. Morrison Consulting, Cybersecurity Division, read the header on the proposal I was drafting. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was planning to help other businesses protect themselves from threats, while having just discovered that my greatest vulnerability had been trusting the wrong person with access to my life. My assistant, Jennifer, not to be confused with Sarah's sister, knocked on my office door. David, I have the final numbers on the Patterson manufacturing contract. I looked up from my computer. Patterson. Any relation to Sarah? I don't think so. Different part of the state. Why? Nothing important. What are the numbers? The contract was substantial, a 6-month engagement to overhaul their entire IT infrastructure. The kind of project that would require my full attention and travel to their facility 3 days a week. Perfect timing for someone who needed to rebuild his routine around work rather than a relationship. Accept it, I said, and schedule a meeting with the team to discuss the cybersecurity expansion. I think it's time we diversified our services. After Jennifer left, I turned back to my computer and opened a new document. For the past 2 weeks, I had been thinking about the lessons I had learned from my experience with Sarah, not just about relationships, but about business and life in general. Trust but verify, I typed. In business, we do due diligence on every major decision. We research potential partners, examine their track records, and protect our interests with contracts and legal safeguards. Yet in our personal lives, we often make the biggest decision of all, who to marry based on feelings and surface-level compatibility. The idea was forming into something larger than a personal reflection. Perhaps it was time to share what I had learned with other successful professionals who might be facing similar risks, not in a bitter or cynical way, but as practical guidance for people who had worked hard to build something worth protecting. The goal isn't to become suspicious or paranoid, I continued writing. The goal is to make decisions based on demonstrated character rather than declared values. Anyone can claim to be selfless, honest, or unmaterialistic, but how people behave when they think no one is watching, or when they believe circumstances have changed, reveals their true nature. I thought about the men and women in my professional network, people who had built successful businesses, accumulated wealth, and reached positions of influence. How many of them had been taken advantage of by people who saw them primarily as sources of financial security? How many had ignored red flags because they wanted to believe in someone's stated values rather than their actual behavior? The cybersecurity expansion suddenly took on a broader meaning. Just as businesses needed protection from digital threats, successful individuals needed protection from personal ones. The skills were different, but the principle was the same: vulnerabilities, implement safeguards, and maintain vigilance without becoming paralyzed by suspicion. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected," I replied, focusing on work and future plans. "Good. Don't let this experience make you cynical about love." "Not cynical," I typed back. "Just more careful about who I trust with it." That evening, I had dinner with Michael, who had been checking on me regularly since the wedding disaster. "You seem different," he observed. "More settled. Somehow, I feel more like myself than I have in 2 years," I admitted. "It's strange how much energy it takes to ignore your instincts about someone." "Any regrets about how you handled things?" I considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Sarah turned out to be someone other than who she presented herself to be. But I don't regret protecting myself from a future built on false premises. And going forward, I'm building the business I always wanted and taking time to figure out what authentic partnership actually looks like." 6 weeks after the wedding, I discovered that the story of my bankruptcy test had spread far beyond our immediate circle. A local business journal had picked up the story, running it under the headline "Software Executive's Wedding Day Reality Check Sparks Debate About Prenups and Trust." The article was surprisingly balanced, presenting both sides of the situation without taking a clear stance on whether my actions were justified or cruel. What surprised me more were the responses it generated. "David Morrison did what every successful person should consider," wrote one commenter. "Testing someone's true character before marriage is smart business." "This man is a manipulative narcissist who destroyed his own wedding to prove a point," wrote another. Sarah dodged a bullet, but it was the private messages that proved most interesting. I received emails from 3 different men who had gone through similar experiences, not with fake bankruptcy papers, but with various tests they had devised to determine their partners' true motivations. One was a doctor who had told his fiancée that he was considering leaving medicine to become a teacher, only to watch her immediately begin questioning their future together. Another was a real estate developer who had learned that his girlfriend was secretly researching his property holdings while publicly claiming she didn't care about his wealth. "The pattern is always the same," wrote Dr. Marcus Webb from Portland. "They say money doesn't matter while carefully positioning themselves to benefit from yours. Thank you for having the courage to expose this publicly." More unexpected was the call I received from Sarah herself. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in my office reviewing the cybersecurity proposal when my assistant announced that my ex-wife was online too. "Hello, Sarah." "David." Her voice was flat, professional. "I'm calling because my attorney thinks we should settle this quickly and quietly." "I agree. What are you proposing?" "No alimony, no property division, clean annulment. In exchange, you agree not to discuss our marriage publicly anymore." The offer was more reasonable than I had expected. "And your attorney supports this?" "My attorney thinks a prolonged legal battle would be expensive and embarrassing for both of us, especially given the publicity this situation has generated." Had wondered when the media attention would reach her. Apparently it had. "There's something else," she continued. "I've been getting calls from reporters wanting my side of the story. So far, I've declined to comment, but that could change if you continue to paint me as some kind of gold digger." "Sarah, I haven't spoken to any reporters. Maybe not directly, but someone has been sharing details about our relationship, about the test, about my reaction. Details that could only have come from you." She was right that the story contained specific information, but wrong about the source. "Have you considered that other people at the reception might be talking? We had 200 witnesses to what happened." The silence on the other end of the line suggested she hadn't considered that possibility. "Look," I said, "I'm willing to agree to your terms with one addition. We both agree not to discuss the marriage or each other publicly. Complete mutual non-disclosure. Agreed. Good. Have your attorney draw up the papers. After hanging up, I realized that Sarah was probably dealing with her own version of unexpected consequences. While I had received support from some quarters for my practical approach, she was likely facing judgment for her reaction to the fake bankruptcy papers. The Business Journal article had quoted several relationship experts, and their opinions were mixed but telling. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a marriage counselor, had written, "While Mr. Morrison's methods were unconventional, his concerns about financial compatibility in marriage are valid. Many relationships fail because partners have different attitudes toward money, but never discuss them honestly." On the other hand, Dr. James Patterson, no relation to Sarah's family, had countered, "Trust is the foundation of any healthy relationship." By deceiving his bride on their wedding day, Mr. Morrison demonstrated that he was incapable of the very trust he was demanding from her. Both perspectives had merit, but I knew which one felt true to my experience. Trust had to be earned through consistent behavior over time, not simply declared and accepted at face value. 6 months after the wedding that never was, I found myself in an unexpected place, both literally and figuratively. I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Portland, having just finished a consultation with Dr. Marcus Webb, the physician who had reached out after reading the Business Journal article about my experience. What had started as a conversation about shared experiences had evolved into something more significant. Dr. Webb had introduced me to several other professionals who had faced similar challenges with partners, who seemed more interested in their financial security than their personal character. Together, we had begun developing what we called authentic partnership workshops, sessions designed to help successful individuals navigate relationships more safely and authentically. The goal, I explained to the small group gathered in the coffee shop, isn't to become cynical or suspicious. It's to become better at recognizing genuine compatibility versus strategic positioning. Among the group was Alina Rodriguez, a 38 architect who had built a successful firm specializing in sustainable design. She had attended 3 of our workshops over the past 2 months, not because she was currently dating anyone, but because she wanted to understand the patterns that had led to 2 failed engagements with men who seemed supportive of her career, until they realized how much more successful she was than they were. "The biggest insight for me," Alina said, "was realizing that I had been downplaying my success to make other people comfortable. I was essentially lying about who I was to avoid threatening potential partners." Her comment resonated with everyone. In the group, we had all, in different ways, learned to hide or minimize our achievements to seem more approachable or less intimidating. The irony was that this strategy attracted exactly the wrong kind of people. Those who were drawn to the lifestyle success provided but uncomfortable with the work and dedication required to achieve it. As our informal meeting wrapped up, Alina approached me privately. "David, I wanted to thank you for having the courage to share your story publicly. It's helped me understand that protecting myself isn't the same as being selfish. Thank you for saying that. Some days I wonder if I handled things the right way." "You handled things honestly. That's more than most people can say." Over the following weeks, Alina and I began meeting for coffee regularly, ostensibly to discuss the workshop curriculum, but increasingly to simply enjoy each other's company. What struck me about her was how consistent she was, her values, her behavior, her treatment of everyone from successful colleagues to coffee shop employees remained constant. More importantly, she had built her own success and understood the responsibility that came with it. When we went to dinner, she insisted on splitting the check. When I mentioned a charity I supported, she shared information about causes she had been funding for years. When I talked about my business challenges, she offered insights based on her own experience building and managing a company. "I have a confession," she said one evening, as we walked along the riverfront after dinner. "I researched you before attending that first workshop." "What did you find?" "That you practice what you preach. Your business has an excellent reputation. You pay your employees well, and you've been quietly supporting various charities for years. Your actions match your stated values, and that matters to you." "It matters because I've learned that people often present themselves as they wish they were, rather than as they actually are. You seem to be someone who has figured out how to be both." 3 months later, Alina and I were sitting in the same coffee shop where our first workshop had been held, working on a presentation for a national conference on professional relationships. As we reviewed our materials, I realized that something had shifted in my perspective. I used to think the lesson of my experience with Sarah was about being more careful. I said, "But I think the real lesson is about being more authentic myself." "How so?" "I spent 2 years with Sarah, partly because I wanted to believe I could find someone who didn't care about my success. But that was its own kind of fantasy. The right person isn't someone who doesn't care about success, it's someone who understands it, respects it, and has achieved their own version of it." Alina smiled. "Someone who sees your success as evidence of your character rather than as an opportunity for their security." Exactly 6 months after that conversation, Alina and I were married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. No tests, no deception, no hidden agendas, just to people who had learned to value authenticity above all else, and had found it in each other. The thank you note I received afterward came from Dr. Webb. Thank you for showing us that the goal isn't to avoid getting her tits to build something real with someone who deserves your trust. As I read his words, I realized that the painful experience with Sarah had led to something I never expected, not just a better understanding of relationships, but a better understanding of myself and what I truly wanted from a partner. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals reveal the most liberating truths. And sometimes the best protection against deception is simply refusing to deceive yourself about who someone really is. The journey from that disastrous wedding day to this moment of genuine happiness had taught me that authentic love requires authentic people, and that both are worth waiting for.